The TCG Design Theory podcast is part of the Booster Pack Network. For more TCG-related content, visit theboosterpacknetwork.com. Hosting for this show is sponsored by Category 1 Games, the go-to shop for all of your classic TCG needs. Find your favorites or discover something new at category1games.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the TCG Design Theory podcast. My name is Jay, and today we're going to be talking about resource mechanics and resource systems in trading card games. And today I have Steve Sekula, who is the creator and designer of the GemBlenders trading card game. So Steve, thanks for being on the show, and how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Jay. Really appreciate you having me here to talk.
So just to start off, can you tell us a little bit about why, about yourself and why you decided to go into trading card game design or game design in general?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Steve. I'm the creator of GemBlenders. Been working on this project for a little over 4 years at this point. It started as a passion project. I had graduated school with a degree in art, started to design the characters, and then designed the game mechanics soon after that. Kind of like pieced it all together, decided to take it to Kickstarter at that point. And then that was in 2019 to print the beta version sets of the game. And we've been using those sets ever since to kind of grow into a small business. And now we're headed back to Kickstarter in March of 2023 to print as a full trading card game to kind of fully realize the vision of GemBlenders.
Cool. And can you go into a little bit about what GemBlenders is all about, you know, maybe some of its gameplay and what people can expect if they were to play GemBlenders?
Yeah, of course. So GemBlenders is a lo-fi trading card game where you mix and match gems, explore blend synergies, and command your heroes to outwit your opponent. So all those things kind of touch on various aspects that are very core to what GemBlenders is. We start by saying lo-fi because when you look at GemBlenders, it looks different than other card games. It's super simple. It has very clean aesthetic. And the reason is, like, when I was coming up with it, I wanted it to look different from other card games. You have games like Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, which kind of go very like intense with their design. You have like the cartoony anime style of Pokemon, and we wanted to do something different. So with GemBlenders, you're not going to have like a traditional fantasy or anime art style with it. It's inspired by like the early internet and old school RPG video games. So that's the number one thing that makes GemBlenders kind of stand out from the pack. In terms of gameplay, there's also a lot of unique features as well, starting with blending. So it's in the name itself. It's called GemBlenders, and that kind of touches on what the world is all about. It's both core to the mechanics and to the lore. So GemBlenders is you have a team of heroes, right? And the heroes are equipped with resources called gems. These are gems. When you get the right combination of gems on your heroes, you can transform them into power-ups called blends. These are transformations. Every blend is like a recipe. They require 2 to 5 different gem types at the top. And when you get the right combination, you can play the blend and power up your hero. And the effects of the blend supersede that of the hero. It's like kind of evolving it in a sense, similar to like in Pokemon. But you also have the ability to deblend your hero, and you can also add more gems and then power them up to something stronger. Like that.
Interesting. And so, seeing that there's the different kinds of gems, did the gems kind of play any part, in how you can build your deck? Are you limited to using only certain gems? Are there cards that use, multiple of one type of gem, or are they all kind of this mishmash of different types?
Yeah. So blends are going to be unique gem types. So every blend is going to be different types of gems. That's kind of the central feature. Like you're blending together different gem types. So that's going to be the central feature. So that's something that's super special with GemBlenders because every deck is going to be a multicolored deck. I think that when you look at a lot of other card games, you're going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 color decks kind of being what the standard is. With GemBlenders, the average deck is going to be 5 colors because your strongest blends are going to be 5 gem blends. There's 9 gems total in this world, so there's a lot of different combinations and cool kind of overlaps that occur.
Yeah. And that's awesome because, to your point, making Gem Blenders a game that kind of stands out from, the traditional card games, is, you want to have a lot of different types of gems to perform these blends and everything like that. Whereas other games, it's like, yeah, I have a 3-color, magic deck, for instance, and it's really hard to summon this card or bring it out or whatever. So I think that's a really interesting, like every deck is a multicolor deck. You're not going to run mono this or mono that, or even 2 gems for that matter. I mean, I guess you could,
You
but
could, it would be pretty bad.
it's an uphill battle, I imagine, just from seeing the gameplay and stuff. So, but on that note, since there's a lot of different ways to go about doing this in card games, let's start off with just defining what is a resource in a trading card game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like a kind of it feels like that's not a big question, I guess. It's anything to pay for something else. So it could be paying for like playing a card on the field or like unlocking something at the same time. When you think about like when I'm looking at Gem Blenders, you're unlocking something. Same with Pokemon, you're unlocking the attacks by playing energies on them. Games like Magic, you pay to play the card.
And have you seen any card games? Oh, sorry.
No,
have you seen any card games that that stray away from that particular model, where it's not, you're not paying to play, but you kind of just play the cards from your deck as is? Have you seen any examples of that?
Yeah. So I think like I mentioned Pokemon, that's like you're not paying to play there, right? You're paying to unlock stuff. And that's the kind of approach I took with Gem Blenders, right? Because you're building on your field and things kind of accumulate and you unlock things as you go. As far as like, I don't think there. I don't know. Are there any games that come to mind for you that?
Right. Yeah. So I think some of the games that come to mind, I believe I may be incorrect on this, but Genesis Battle of Champions, I think, just requires you to have, like, there's a cap on the amount of chi, I think, that your deck can have, and each card has a value that adds to that, and you can't go over it. I think, even though it's a bit of a different beast, there was Richard Garfield's little project called, I say little, Keyforge.
Yeah.
Pretty big. But of course, those are generated in their own way, but you don't necessarily have resources. You just you pick I think a house at a time, and then you get to play whatever cards you want from your hand. And cards range from being somewhat insignificant to very powerful cards. So I didn't know if you had any examples of that. Where it's not necessarily like I pay to play something or I pay to unlock something. Like it's kind of there for you already.
Like woven it. Yeah, I think the Keyforge example, that's from the games that I've played, definitely Keyforge stands out in terms of that. I love how it's kind of so first of all, I like how it's like all the decks are three factions. So I think that's something that stands out to me. That's something that I'm like drawn to in games, like mixing different factions and figuring out synergies between them that aren't necessarily like designed in the game. So yeah, Keyforge. That's a great example. Thanks for that.
Yeah. So I think people kind of gravitate towards the definition of paying to play for a card. Calling those things a resource, even in Yu-Gi-Oh, sacrificing a monster to pay for a bigger, better monster, or however. I think they have 10 different summon types now. I always drag Yu-Gi-Oh in these interviews. It comes from a place of love. I really do love Yu-Gi-Oh. They just need to fundamentally change their game, in my opinion. But so you always have that kind of I give this up to play this. So aside from the Keyforge examples and things like that, are resource systems necessary in trading card games? Is it something that has to be there, or do you think it's something that could kind of change as more and more games come into play?
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I think So looking at a game, if you don't have a resource system, right? In order for the game to be fun and or balanced, I'm using the word balance is probably better. All the cards would need to be relatively even to play. If you don't have a resource system, it's equal to play everything, right? So what a resource system allows you to do is it allows you to have a cost for cards, and it allows you to make them more powerful and have differing effects, more powerful effects, weaker effects. And that's what the resource system allows you to do. It allows you to have this variance. And I think what people like about trading card games is that variance and the depth of strategy that comes from that. So like, yeah, you could definitely have a game with no resource system, but it would potentially be less fun, I'd imagine.
Right. And I think something that something that gets kind of lost is, talking about games like Keyforge or Genesis, the limitations on your deck building in terms of you have this many points to spend on building your deck, and it has to be, 40 to 50 cards. That is a resource to an extent. It's just not a resource you're using in the game. So a lot of different ways you can tackle that. I've seen really interesting examples from some homemade TCGs where, there's all kinds of different things, like your deck is a resource, hand is a resource, the way your cards are patterned on the field is a resource. But there always seems to be something, like you have to do something before doing something else, even if that's even before the game starts. And I think that's fascinating. So I think we can both agree that, resource systems are necessary, unless you want to go, I think, season 1 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Again, picking on Yu-Gi-Oh!, right? Or you could just play whatever.
Yeah.
Or I think if you've ever played the PS1 game Forbidden Memories with Yu-Gi-Oh!, it was absolutely ridiculous. Like if you had a blue eyes, you won. That was it. So
yeah, no fun.
So when approaching resource system design, is it better to have mechanics that are familiar but different, or to aim for something truly special and truly, unique in its own right?
So let me start with GemBlenders. This is what I know best. I think GemBlenders is definitely something that's familiar but different, in terms that it's easily relatable to. I like to use 2 examples. There's Pokemon. The way the gems go onto the heroes is very similar to Pokemon, and it's also similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! in when you're relating it to fusion summoning. And we kind of, because you're mixing different elements together in order to get something new. So those are two familiar things that are kind of transformed into something new by combining them and kind of recentering them to the core component of Gem. Like fusion summoning is like a side mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh!, whereas it's the center part of GemBlenders. I don't think it does any favors for a game to try to like make a mechanic different just to be different.
Right. So you think in resource mechanics, but in mechanics in general, that having some sort of familiarity with other card games is better than being completely original.
Yeah, like if the originality like truly is like core to the game and like the vision of it, then it's like by all means go for it. That's like amazing. But just being different to be different is I think that kind of like falls in line with like calling like a zone on your field something different just to be different, or I don't know. There's like, does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. So cutting things from your game that are kind of just fluff. I think that's a big thing with design is, learn where you need to kind of cull some of these extra things you're doing. Like there's a reason that some of the most successful games are so simple, is because one, they're familiar. People say every game does them, but there's a reason for that. And then it also allows these little changes to happen over time or as you're designing that make it familiar but different, as you say. Like you said, it combines the mechanics, which I will say you did have an opportunity to say it blends together certain mechanics, and I will call you out on that.
Yeah, you're right.
Like you said, with the resources of the Pokemon system and
kind of attaching them to cards and then fusing other things together. With Pokemon, there isn't really a fusion. There's like the evolving, but again, you're kind of just building up to something. But with this, it's like you're attaching resources and then you're blending things together and then you're creating completely new things. So I think that is a great example of familiarity with two different systems and then putting them into one. Now, so I've heard a lot of people say, okay, people who play Magic, okay, I'm tired of having to draw lands, or I'm mana starved, or I'm mana flooded. People in Pokemon, I know there's a lot of cards that are coming out now that are just like, they just make it really easy for you to get resources. Cards that say, hey, when this gets discarded, just draw it right back. Like, it's yours again. So is there a particular reason or a particular thing that drew you to this particular resource system where you had the resources as different cards in your deck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think first off was starting with what I knew best, which was Magic and Pokemon. So that was kind of a natural design choice to make for me. Since I've really gotten into like the TCG design space, like I've obviously experienced a variety of other different resource systems, like ones that like separate it from the deck, other ones where cards have multi-use, where they can be played as characters on your field, or they could be used as resources. And there are like a lot of fascinating routes to take with that. And I don't think any one is necessarily better than another. Like I think there are problems with all of them. And it's up to the game designer to decide what is the best choice, because there's no solution to everything, or else the game is not like a game. So yeah, I think it's like figuring out what feels most elegant for your game. That's what I think is the priority there.
Yeah, and I think what the designers I've talked to always come back to is designing a game that you want to play. If you like the feel of a particular game and that's your inspiration, then there's nothing wrong with that. It's you hear the vocal minority a lot on Reddit and other things like that, who's like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that. Yet these games remain intensely popular. So I wonder what's really going on, right? But yeah, there's a lot of there is a lot of controversy with resources in your deck and things like that. But at the same time, it's a system that works. So with Gem Blenders, using that system where you have the resources in your deck, with your design, is there a limit to any particular kind of card, resources or not, that can be in your deck? Because I can imagine with all the different gems you're trying to juggle around and stuff, it can get kind of complicated to see, okay, I only need 5 of these, and et cetera. So can you kind of go into that design process of how you figured that out?
Yeah, of course. So like our deck restrictions are you have 3 of any regular card type, but the basic gems, which are the resource cards in the game, you can have any amount of any one, which is pretty typical, like when you're looking at energy in Pokemon and lands and Magic. So figuring out how that all kind of fit together was really, I don't know, it felt natural, honestly, because you just kind of like build the deck as...
I think what you were on was you're kind of building the deck at first with like the monster or creature cards that you really enjoy, and then deciding, all right, how many of the resources do I need to make this happen? Is that kind of the angle you were coming at?
Exactly, yeah. And then I think like within the community, there's been kind of like an agreed upon standard amount of gems that go into the deck, and it's like you kind of look at your array of blends in the deck and figure out how many of each make sense. It's like, okay, I have more guys that use an aqua gem in this deck, so I'll lean into that a little bit. But of course, you still need the ones that appear less too. And I think like a lot of the game design of Gem Blenders, like as you mentioned, it's hard to balance a lot of different resources. So woven into Gem Blenders is that it is a little easier to get resources compared to most games. Like in Gem Blenders, a draw is not as good as it is in another card game, just because it's easier to do a draw. It's easier to search your deck, and that's necessary for the design of Gem Blenders.
Of course. Yeah, and something that I always come back to when thinking about resource systems is, when you have the differences between digital trading card games and physical trading card games. Some, of course, that do both. Um, and I think a big factor, and of course, let me know if this was a big factor for you, but a big factor is when you have those resource cards, just kind of keeping track of resources like on a die or on a dial of sorts. It can seem kind of lame. just, just to be pretty frank, like if you had a mana system like Hearthstone, not that it's a bad design, of course, but playing lands or playing energy and then tapping them and then activating them, and in your case, blending the gems into something else and having that stack of cards that it says, okay, I have this thing, but look what I did to accomplish that. Like it's a very visual thing that you're seeing. Do you think that plays into a lot of the resource systems in physical card games specifically?
Hmm, that's actually really fascinating. Yeah, so I like looking at Hearthstone. Like every element of that game was designed with digital play in mind. I think that includes the resource system as well, because how it's not like if there like digitally there is like an easier way to just like you get a mana every turn, and that's easier to showcase digitally. Not easier to showcase digitally, but easier. Like it's like why showcase it digitally? Why draw a card? Why draw a resource digitally? Is kind of what I'm getting at. And physically, it has a lot more impact, as you mentioned. So definitely, like the resource systems are affected, whether it's digital versus non-digital.
Hmm. And this is maybe a bit off topic of the general resource system theme, but with games like Pokemon and what you're doing with Gem Blenders and Magic, for instance, that you need X amount of the same card in your deck. Like it kind of makes you like you need to go out and get like that essential set of cards that you can build off of. How does that, so with those resource decisions in mind, how does that affect maybe the marketability of the game, or even the accessibility of the game of like, hey, I want to try this game out, but in your game, for instance, you have 9 different gems. It's like you don't want someone to think that they have to have 50 copies of each gem or anything like that. So how do you approach that in your design? Because obviously trading card games and games in general, you have to think about the product as well, not just in terms of like if you want to make money, but just in terms of if you want to get people to buy in with their money or time. So did any of those decisions when you were designing this game kind of play into or factor in when it came to just accessibility and bringing people into the game in terms of how the resources played out?
Yeah, of course. I think this is like leading into our Kickstarter phase here, where this is something we're definitely considering with the team because we want people to be able to play the game. And in order to play the game, you have to have gems. And you have to have enough gems in order to build a deck, which is not an insignificant amount. And I think like rewinding a bit to when we printed it as a living card game for the beta version of the set, I think like that was a big decision why we decided to print as a living card game versus a trading card game, because we wanted people to actually be able to play the game and have the gameplay accessible to people so we could continue to grow, like we did over the last 3 years. And what that meant is just giving people a lot of gems in the packages.
Yeah, it's like with anything else, like with a Magic pack, or like one of their, I don't know what they call them, elite packs maybe, but you get a good variety of lands and things like that. So, and of course you get one per pack, any game that does that. So yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I thought about those types of designs myself, and it always comes down to that, right? Like if you're with starter decks, it's one thing because you're kind of getting everything you need right there. But for someone who wants to approach it from a more a la carte type thing, where it's like, hey, I just kind of want to see what's going on. Um, it's also interesting to think about it from that perspective of, okay, well, this will get you this will get you started. So it's like a starter deck, but it's just like gems or lands or energies. And then you can, go from there and activate them that way. So with touching on how your game does it and some of the other big games do it, I know, again, there's a lot of indie TCGs coming out. A lot of them have mostly familiar but different, resource mechanics and the way the game plays in general. What are some examples that you've seen that you would say are like take the more unique route as opposed to the more familiar route? Anything that kind of stands out in terms of, they're using resources and I didn't really think they would use them that way.
Yeah. I think so. One notable example that I haven't played the Digimon card game yet, actually. It's kind of been out for a couple years now, but it's relatively new on the scene in terms of like major companies creating card games. And the memory system they have for playing the games I find very fascinating. I'll explain it a little bit, I guess. But so just like when you play a Digimon, it eats into like a kind of a communal memory strip that basically gives like when you play something more expensive, it allows your opponent to play something more expensive the next turn. Is kind of how it goes. So it's like an interesting like tug of war. So I think that's like kind of been one of the more notable examples of kind of like a redefinition of a resource system that I've seen recently. But I haven't played with it, so don't know how well it works. But people like the game, so it must work pretty well.
Yeah, and so and I would agree with you 100%. I haven't played Digimon, but I've seen the gameplay and the tug of war. I think it's called memory that you're playing with. The back and forth of, hey, yeah, I can make a lot of big moves this turn, but then my opponent's going to be able to react to that. And I know that with Digimon, you can also digivolve. I can't explain enough how much it annoys me, and I don't know why. It annoys me that everything is digi this, digi that, or with the monsters, like the end of their names are all Mon, like
Yeah.
Mon. I don't know. It's always that, and I get it. Like it's all part of the theme, but it can get excessive. If you've seen the game, it can get excessive. But I also know that you can digivolve your monsters by, if you have a monster on the field, you can use its like digivolve cost instead of the full cost to bring something else on. So I know that Digimon does like two resource systems. You have the memory and you have like the Yu-Gi-Oh system where you have like a card on the field, except it doesn't go away. It leaves its ability with that card, which is always something I found like really interesting. I know a lot of people are really into the Digimon card game. So that's something for sure. Have you seen any examples in perhaps indie trading card games that have had maybe not unique resource mechanics, but just any of them that intrigue you or interest you in terms of how they do it?
Yeah, actually, I had another one come to mind too. That it's like you've heard of Alestrals. Yeah, they said the big Kickstarter. And I also have not played this game, but I thought it was fascinating how I think particularly for this episode, how they tie the life, like the win condition, to the resource system, because they have like a separate spirit deck that allows you to, and then so you have a separate spirit deck, and then once the spirit deck's gone, you lose. So you have to like conserve your resources in order to win, but then you also have to play your resources in order to win. So that's like kind of an interesting take. Obviously I haven't played that game yet. So it's not out yet. I guess you could play online, but I think that's a fascinating one as well. It's kind of really digging into a different approach to the resource system.
Right. And I know they have a pretty big following, so that when this game does fulfill from Kickstarter, they're going to get a lot of feedback, and they're going to know pretty quickly whether that works or not. Because one of the big taboos that I've heard in the design community in general is you don't tie your life force to your resource system, because then you're constantly making the decision of okay, am I basically damaging myself to play this card, and et cetera, et cetera. And personally, I've never really had a problem with it. I've seen the Alestrals gameplay, and I think it's really fascinating, because it's not like you take 7 damage and half your deck is gone all of a sudden. It's very nuanced in the way that you're attaching spirits to your cards, and you very much have most of the control in terms of how you want to defend yourself and how quickly you want to use those resources for other things. But yeah, I would definitely agree. Elestrals is a very unique and a very interesting example of that, because there's some games out there that they just, okay, if you want to play a card, you just discard cards, or you just get rid of cards from your deck to play a card, and it's like, I can see that being not fun. I haven't had any personal experience doing that, but I can definitely see how that would just take away from the fun. Whereas an example like you gave with Elestrals, it is very much a very slower paced, tactical way, I guess, of doing that same thing. So we got, kind of the memory system from Digimon. We got the spirit system from Elestrals. Anything else that comes to mind in terms of systems that, kind of interest you or pique your interest about the way that they're handling resources?
Yeah, I think just the example you brought up earlier of Keyforge is also really strong in terms of the unique. It's almost not even a resource system, but it is also a resource system. Yeah, so I think that's a fascinating one where you just kind of name the house.
Right, and then those decks are randomly, generated to be playable and not too overpowered or underpowered, I'd imagine. I mean, I assume. So that you're not having to worry about resources, but you're making, like, I guess your decision is the resource. You still can't play all your cards each turn. Like, you're deciding what faction to use, so your decision making is essentially the limiter. But it's kind of weird to say.
It's a weird one. Yeah, I played it very briefly, but really I enjoyed it. I thought, yeah, I'm trying to think, but I feel like there is a decision you make. Like, I feel like sometimes it's not an easy decision to make, but then other times it's more difficult. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Well, on that note of kind of how the resource systems play into, I guess a novelty of how a game is played. What do you think is the importance of having a resource system that fits thematically with the game? That blends, no pun intended. I really didn't mean that one. That blends well with the other mechanics of the game, like combat, like drawing, draw power, things like that. What are some good examples of games that do that?
From my experience with GemBlenders, it's obviously a very core piece to the lore and theme of the game, and that's just natural. It's kind of the way the game was designed. Started with the lore, and then it's like, okay, yeah, gems are going to be the resource in this game. That's like an easy decision to make. I think looking at this question a little more like from like a macro level, like any feature, any game mechanic in your game that you can tie in with the lore is going to be beneficial to the game. But then when you go look at the actual game design, you don't want it to feel forced. You want it to feel natural. You want it to feel elegant. So that's like any part of the game design. I think looking at the resources specifically, there's like I think like Magic, that one's a little more lore based, I feel like, right? Whereas like Pokemon, energy is like, what's an energy?
Yeah.
It's like a made up feature that's not in any other part of the Pokemon IP. So it's like it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, I don't think. It's just like finding ways to emphasize your lore in the various game mechanics. I don't think resources are a really cool way to do it if you can do it that way, but they're not like the only way to do it.
Right. And I think an interesting thing that comes to mind, I'll touch on kind of the physical versus digital comparison again, is games. So you got games like Hearthstone, Legends of Runeterra, Marvel Snap, which recently came out, of course, which I play way too much of. Way too much of my time.
Is it good?
The games are like 5 minutes. I don't know. Inbro didn't pay me to say this. I promise. It's like, it's just really quick games. But all those systems use you just get more mana or more energy each turn. And I'm wondering if because it's digital and because they're trying to streamline everything, that's the reason. Whereas when you look at physical card games, it is like, okay, the lands, the gems, the energy, as suspect as that is. With Yu-Gi-Oh, of course, it's the monster summons. It being a physical product first, knowing that some of these have digital counterparts, um, having that resource mechanic play a more thematic role. Because, what is mana in Hearthstone? It's points, right? At the end of the day, like everything like mages use mana. Warriors have no reason to use mana, right? For the most part, but everything uses mana in the game. It's just points. Um, so finding a way to have your resources be something that ties into the mechanics of your game, into the theme of your game, is obviously really important. But yeah, you talked about you wanting to have something that is thematic, but also something that benefits the gameplay as well. So where do designers draw that line, right? As a player and a designer yourself, what do you want to see in a game in terms of, oh yeah, this feels really good to the gameplay, but oh yeah, this also feels really good with like the theme. And of course you want the perfect combination of both of those things. But you know, what would you say out of those two things would be more important? Like if you had to have like a 60-40 split between something that felt more thematic versus felt better gameplay wise, which way would you be leaning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would lean towards 60% on the game play side. Yeah, that's what I would say. It's not an easy choice though. Definitely not an easy choice. These both are very important. But that's what I would say. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the balance between game, like what benefits gameplay more versus what benefits the theme more, gameplay usually comes out on top because you want people to have an enjoyable experience, and they can kind of draw their own connections to the theme based off of their games and things like that. So yeah, kind of going into a little bit more of the story and the lore of your game, knowing that the gems are the resource there. What is the deal with gems in Gem Blenders and in Gemlandia, um, that makes them a thematic resource for your game?
Of course, yes. Very happy to go into that. So in the world of Gemlandia, there are 9 basic gem types, and they're kind of like they're all, each gem has its own kind of individual history, but each gem type, excuse me, there's like many of these gems all around the world, but they occur naturally for the most part, and there's kind of like a part of daily life. So and blending itself, the idea of transforming into these power ups is a part of daily life as well. The game itself focuses on a sport of sorts where they're like battling each other in teams, but like people could blend into like an angel and just like travel somewhere. Like that's just like a normal daily occurrence as well. So these gems have just like naturally occurring. They like form societies, and there's like different communities that focus on different blends and different gems. And that's kind of how it all pieces together.
Interesting. So there's not like a green community. There's like oh hey, we like green, red, and blue. This type.
Yeah, I'd say definitely more like that. Exactly.
Okay. That's very interesting. Yeah. And of course, that's a huge part of how it plays into the lore of your story and how it plays into your game. Because as you said at the beginning of the interview, everybody has a multicolored deck. You're not going to run one. I mean, you're most likely going to have 5 different types of gems, which is more than half of the possible gems you can have. So, kind of going along those lines, you do have to be familiar with, I guess, I mean, going on that, did each gem have a particular gameplay mechanic? I mean, because like in Pokemon, right? Like it doesn't really have, like fire is fire, right? Like, okay, yeah, it's a fire attack. You can burn, sure. But like if you run a fire deck, it's not like you're going to do like be more aggressive than someone running a water deck, for instance. Whereas in Magic, that absolutely is the case. If you're running a red deck, you're going to be fast, you're going to be quick, which obviously those two words mean the same thing. But do you have anything like that in Gem Blenders where each gem kind of focuses on a different trait or a different element of the world?
Yeah. So loosely, I want to say, so it's a really complicated structure we have going on here, because everything it's like a web of interconnectivity between all the different blends, because you have 1.5 gem blend, right? And then there's like a variety of level 2 blends that are sub blends of it. So it's hard to pinpoint a distinct flavor for any one gem type. I think it's definitely more of like a kind of an archetype based game, whereas like you have a level 5 blend that's going to be your win condition, and then there's sub blend. That's what we call them, sub blends, blends that use like any subset of gems from a higher level blend, that are going to kind of be able to support it in a variety of ways. So like looking at it, yeah. So there's no aqua gem is not control in gem blenders, but there is like a general flavor to them that like aqua gems have like a watery feeling effect, whatever that might be. But
yeah. And so, touching on that, in your design, you said like it's all interconnected, and you have the level 5 that ends up being like your win condition, and everything is the sub blends underneath it. Have you found naturally in your design with these resources that particular blends tend to be one way or the other? Like you said, aqua gems are more watery, right? I mean, even if it's not gameplay wise, even if it's like thematic, have you found that, okay, this one's using a red gem? Do you naturally think, okay, it has to look like this or play like this versus a white gem or otherwise?
So can you rephrase that again? So
yeah, basically, if like as you've naturally gone with creating, your creatures and your blends, and deciding, okay, this guy needs these 3 specific things, and as you create more of that, as you create more cards, has there been a direction that has naturally pulled you one way or the other when deciding which gems go with which blends?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting question. I think particularly for someone who's like me, who's like, I'm illustrating the characters plus designing the game mechanics, so it's like kind of doing it all in one. I think so. Like, I have all the gems. This is how I create the blitz. You have all the gems, right? And then I like need to create one that uses like, say, a Lucio gem and an Aero gem. And then it's like I come up with the concept. That concept it's a light gem and the air gem, so that's Angel. But so I create the characters before I create the mechanics, and then I create the mechanics to kind of follow the characters. That's kind of the trajectory of every blend that's been created. It's not like it's not like an exact science to it, but that's how it goes. So usually it's theme and then mechanics, in terms of how the effects are created, and then the theme also informs different like flavors of mechanics as well.
And I think that's how a lot of people approach it. Well, at least some of the indie TCGs coming out now, some of the more established ones like Magic, or they can't really afford to stray away from making white give you life, and then blue control and things like that. But yeah, no, that's very interesting, because these gems have names, these resources have names, they have a general feeling. So when you create these blends, you're getting something that has a mixture of anywhere from 2 to 5 different gemstones, and then you're like, what would this do? Like, what mechanics would come from this? And I think it's a really interesting way to do that, because if you take design from that perspective, I think you naturally are going to be designing, these blends and gems to kind of fit certain play styles, not to a specific T like some other games, but you're going to have that general feeling. And I think that's something that's lost a lot. A lot of people like to, I forget what it's called, but they think of the absolute best deck, the absolute best in the meta, and they're like, I have to play this way. And it's like, where's the fun in that? Like you're just running this program essentially. You're playing this deck that you may not even like, but you just want to win at all costs, be a spike or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, just going off the feeling, especially if you get that as a designer, I know your player is going to feel that as well, especially when they're building their decks and they're like, okay, this is my level 5 guy. These are all my sub blends. All those sub blends are going to feel or have familiar mechanics, most likely, to when you get to that level 5 or maybe some of those level 4s. And is that what you've seen when you've designed the game and play tested it, that it kind of stays within that same area as you design?
That same area being
Like the mechanics being similar, like if you built your deck around a specific level 5 blend, um, and the mechanics that that blend would use, do you see those similar blends or similar mechanics happening with the sub blends that happened before that?
I'd say no, actually. So Gem Blenders is, so as I mentioned, like there's the interconnectivity, right? So there's a lot of weird overlaps between all the cards. Whereas so like an angel, for example, is going to be like a valid card to put in 1/4 of your decks, because 1/4 of the level 5 blends have angel as a sub blend. So cards like angel are going to have very like it lets you like switch position once per turn. It's a very like standard easy effect. So they're going to be more open effects. More like high use, whereas they get more specific as you get higher, but also more powerful. So yeah, so your lower level ones will be more high use is kind of what I'm getting at, I guess. Yeah, it's an interesting. I don't think it really necessarily matches any. I guess it like matches like one drops in Magic. They're usually pretty standard effects there. I don't know.
Right, cards that are going to get played more and be more
Yeah,
valuable and things like that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So do you have, so for instance, you said like angels, right? So if there's a type that has that like an angel is going to be good to use with that, does the angel have a particular play style or mechanic that happens that also matches that higher blend, or is it just, yeah, if you're going to use this blend, you pretty much know you're going to use this. The mechanics may not be the same, but you at least understand that the blends that use these gems are going to be doing this essentially.
Yeah, not like not necessarily. There's so many different. I feel like there's so many different circumstances that it's hard to pin down exactly one thing. I think looking at like so our two starter decks from the beta version, we have one that focuses on Angel, and that's like Angel lets you move around. It's a very easy to navigate deck, and it does like kind of consistent damage. Whereas the other deck is more of a defensive based deck. It's based around Rams and Mages, and the big guy's called Rage Domesticator there, and that one's more defensive. And then once you get into position, you can do a bigger attack. So there's like two examples of like very broad flavors of decks where it's like bigger damage and then quicker, more easy to navigate.
Right. So it seems like basically what you're saying is the mechanics are similar between archetypes, right? So angels do one thing, mages do one thing. Would you say that angels and mages tend to use the same gems more often than not, or are the gems all over the place with those archetypes as well? Like with angels, do they use all 9 gems? Do they only use like 3 out of the 9? Is there anything there?
Yeah, so this is more of a complicated question than you think. So there's 4 schools of blending. So there's the light gem and the dark gem, and then there's the wing gem and the horn gem. The light gem and the wing gem make the angel, and then the dark gem and the wing gem make the foul. So there's like the dark, and then those are going to be 2 of the schools of blending, and then there's the herald and the ram are the other 2 schools. So everything's going to kind of fall into these 4 categories that use either light air, light horns, dark horns. So that's kind of the foundation of like Gemlandian lore. Not to go too deep in there, but the game is structured around that. And all the level 5 blends fall into one of those 4 schools.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's fascinating because, from what you're saying about the game, you can't just have someone, rolling up saying, oh yeah, I play mostly red gem decks. I have a lot of red gem blends that I tend to use because I like the way they play. It's like, no, I play this archetype, or I play, I have a favorite, level 5 blend that I base, my play style around. And I think that's interesting because that does fall really close in line with a lot of the things that Yu-Gi-Oh's tried to do with their archetypes, and you blend and then I think it's called unblending. No, maybe not.
Deblending.
Deblending. But you have it to where you blend, and then when you no longer need that card anymore, you can deblend it and then use its resources. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the gems are always going to stay on the field when you deblend, so you can constantly build to something stronger.
Right. So in a way, like you have a lot of that, like you were mentioning before, those that combination of like Yu-Gi-Oh mechanics to where you're having blends kind of power, like you're using blends when you need them, and then they're powering up more powerful blends down the road. And then you also have the Pokemon side of it where you have very specific energy types or gem types that are allowing you to do certain things. And I think it does play uh, kind of close, I guess, to the Pokemon, the way they do it thematically. Like you said, energy is not really a thing in Pokemon, but to where, if you're running a fire deck, you're not, I mean, you're going to have burn. If you run water, you're going to have like freeze and stuff like that, but you're not going to have a whole like play style that's affected by one particular color. So I think that's very interesting. You're kind of going off of archetypes. You're going off of the archetypes being able to use whatever gems they need to use, um, which is going to then give you a lot more options when it comes to what cards you can have where. Because, if you come up with a mage card that uses specific gems and then down the road it uses completely different gems, then if you're building a mage deck, that's going to change up what you have to have for your resources in your deck. And so given that in mind, is that a challenge that you were aware of right off the bat? Is that something that you want players to experience as a challenge as they're deck building? And does that play into kind of set releases and keeping every card more or less viable, with other things kind of coming out? Like, oh, I wasn't really able to find a place for this card before, but now I'm able to use it because there's more cards of this type.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I think so. Looking back at kind of these last 4 years in designing Gem, but I think when I set off to create it originally, I wanted to kind of capture that feeling of mixing different cards together that weren't necessarily designed to go together. I think that's actually something that I really enjoyed, like growing up, like trying to find synergies. I think that's what any card game player also enjoys, who's interested in like the strategy of the gameplay, is finding cards that synergize well together, that weren't, like, I guess whether they were designed to work together or not doesn't really matter, but I wanted to capture that feeling. So there's no cards that necessarily like reference each other in their effect text, like Yu-Gi-Oh does. And that was a design choice on my end, because I don't want that feeling to feel forced. So I don't know what I was getting at there, but I think that was definitely a key feature in coming up with how the whole blending system works and figuring out how it all fits together.
Mm-hmm. And from an outside perspective, it seems like it gives players the creativity to kind of mix and match whatever they feel like they want to try, but still limits them because you can't possibly fit blends that need all 9 gems in your deck. I mean, I guess you could try. I mean, I don't know, but
there's one archetype that kind of relies on that, but it's a very specialized one. Yeah,
it's like a 5-color deck in Magic. It's like you have your limitations, but you also have a lot of flexibility. So I guess it's harder to define a meta in that case, which I think is probably important, because meta, for me, anytime someone says meta, I just roll my eyes. Like it's like, yeah, you've calculated the best way or the most likely way to win the game. All right, cool. But again, where's the fun in that? So, but yeah, no, the resource system sounds great. It sounds like the thing that you've done here with Gem Blenders is really unique in the fact that it does combine 2 things that are very familiar to players, and it combines them into this system that kind of gives you, I guess, the best of both worlds when you think of it that way. Something that's very thematic, something that's again very familiar. So between your design of the initial set and the set that you've got coming out next month, March 2023, correct? Have there been any big design changes from those 2 sets that that you're really looking forward to players kind of experiencing after this Kickstarter is over with?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question because we've been very hard at work since the beta version set. I think like obviously most of the changes are going to be uh, like art design changes, like updated template designs. We have full art cards, holographic cards, booster packs. Um, so those are kind of like a big bulk of it. Gameplay wise, it's still the same game from its course, but like resource mechanics like identical. We have like we've done like pretty in-depth game testing, so a lot of cards are going to be reworded. Some effects are going to be updated to accommodate that. But definitely the bulk of the changes from. Also, we're adding a bunch of new cards. That's like another big addition is like just more cards. So we're reprinting all the beta version cards plus adding about 50% more cards on top of that.
Gotcha. And can you go into a little bit more detail about the Kickstarter in terms of, what exactly you're trying to accomplish with getting it funded, and maybe, because you're making the jump from one product to a trading card game product, what some of the differences people can expect in terms of, starter decks, booster packs, anything like that they're going to see during that Kickstarter.
Yeah, of course. So right now we're planned for end of March. I think tentatively it's going to be March 21st is going to be our launch date. Still going to confirm that soon. And this is going to be the first time that we're looking to print as a true trading card game. So that's have booster packs, booster boxes, holographic cards. We're gonna start. We've been testing out a drafting format as well, and just like a bunch of like anything you would expect with a regular trading card game. Is now going to be a part of GemBlenders, which is really exciting for us. We're going to have, as far as the products we'll have available, we're still really finalizing it, but definitely starter decks and definitely booster boxes are going to be in the mix.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds awesome. And, what last question here about, kind of the Kickstarter and everything, but what can people expect as a backer? Essentially getting on the ground floor of the trading card game version of GemBlenders. What are you really excited for people to experience that are kind of going to be backing this first rendition of this type of game?
Yeah, of course. So I think like obviously this is like a very important project to me. It's been my like really like one of the core parts of my life for the last 4 years. So it's like and like obviously the biggest part right now. And it just like means a lot to be sharing the gameplay with people. And I think we have a game that's really good here. We've been gameplay's always been the focus for us. So like we're confident that the gameplay is good, and that there is like a competitive scene to be had for it. And there's been a lot of care that's gone into the game design and the world building as well, that goes along with it. And I think this is my original IP. So it's like that's really exciting for us too, and we think it's different than a lot of other card games out there. So it's I think people who are looking for good gameplay and kind of like a new experience that stands out within the TCG genre should definitely check out GemBlenders, and I think we'll have a lot to offer.
Gotcha. And where can people find you? Where can they find the game? In case they have any questions or want to look further into it.
Yeah, of course. So GemBlenders.com has all of our links. We're on social media, Instagram, our Discord links on our website. It's a great way to just talk to the community and talk to the creators. And yeah, GemBlenders.com. Check it out.
Awesome. Well, Steve, this has been a, this conversation started off about how I thought, talking about, some of the resources or some of the resource mechanics and things like that. But, kind of diving deeper into GemBlenders, it really is complex. Like it is this like really interesting, complex way to do resources. And so I'm excited to see what the Kickstarter does. And of course, I'm very, very appreciative of you coming on and talking about the different resource designs and systems that you've seen, kind of how you've implemented that in your design based on how you've seen those as a player and what you've played with your own game and how you've made those design changes. So, is there anything else that you want to leave off with before we hop off?
No, just to check out the Kickstarter page and just wanted to thank you for having me on. Really enjoyed talking about it. I love everything you're doing on this podcast, and look forward to seeing what more you create. So,
All right, I appreciate it. All right. Well, thanks, Steve.
thank you very much.
All right, so that was Steve Sekula, the creator behind the GemBlenders TCG, and that was our discussion about resource mechanics and resource systems in trading card games. And I think the approach that he's taken in his game is very interesting because it mixes together two systems that are very familiar to create something that is truly unique. So if you want to know more about the game, you can go to GemBlenders.com and find their social media accounts there. You can also hop on their Discord. And if you're interested in the game beyond just kind of seeing how it works, maybe you want to play it, you can also look forward to their Kickstarter, which will be out in March 2023. So another thing you can do is, if you're trying to design your own trading card game or just a card game in general, and you want to learn how to perhaps design a resource system that is going to work for you in your game, nothing works better, in my opinion, than actually going out and playing the games and experiencing them. And over the past 30 years of trading card game history, there has been so many games that have come out that have done so many different things to innovate and to build upon what other games have done. So going back and playing some of those older games is really valuable. And that's where I think Category 1 Games comes in and provides just something that is truly incredible, which is a huge selection of trading card games and collectible games from the entire 30-year span of trading card games. They have games that are still in print, things that people are still playing now that are still coming out with expansions, all the way back to things that are out of print that are really hard to find. You can find those games at category1games.com, and playing those games can be really helpful to figuring out what specific changes and things you want to do to your trading card game that that really make it stand out, that really make it work within your structure. So that's category1games.com. And for more content from the TCG Design Theory podcast or any of the other shows that we've got going on, you can go to the boosterpacknetwork.com. You can also follow us on our social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our handle is at TBPN Content. And of course, you can also join us on Discord or message me directly at j@theboosterpacknetwork.com. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the content. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.